MMA fighting in Melbourne, Australia. UFC 243 is in the books. It was another historic night in Melbourne. Over 57,000 people came to attend this event at the Marvel Stadium, and we've had another big upset knockout to finish off the card, with Israel Adesanya finishing Robert Whittaker. Once again, I'm joined by the lovely Australian lads, the Submission Radio boys, Kacper and Denis, backed by popular demand, to discuss everything that unraveled at the event today. Denis, first of all, I got to ask about Israel Adesanya. What a performance. Is this guy the biggest star in the UFC now?
I think we're going to say something else.
We got to put this into...
The Prime Minister of New Zealand, no. Listen, here's the fact, Petesy. Israel Adesanya's got a number of factors that makes him a very rare commodity to MMA these days. Sure, he's an absolutely amazing fighter. Sure, he's super exciting. And of course, he's great to do an interview with. We saw the post-fight press conference was absolutely hilarious. Like, he's getting his cousin on the phone. He's talking about all sorts of things. The can't stay on the table. What's that about? But the fact that makes him most valuable to me is the fact that this is a guy that fights frequently. Okay, so not only does this a guy with star power, but this is a guy that, and he said this at the post-fight press conference, he is looking to fight frequently even now that he is champion. Now let's look at what's down the road from Paulo Costa. To me, that is a blockbuster fight. Great build-up. You know, Paulo Costa, he says what he thinks. You know, he's this great, huge-looking guy. It's almost mythical seeing these guys fight each other. Then you got Raiders Stadium with John Jones, maybe a Stipe fight if they build a stadium in New Zealand. And also you've got this great story about how his coach, City Kickboxing, has been around for a really long time, is now coming to the absolute spotlight. I mean, they got Dan Hooker, like Brad Riddell just had a huge performance. Kacper France is fighting over in December. But Alex Volkanovski might be bringing a title back. So absolutely, this guy is on his way to being the biggest star in the sport.
And I think there's a lot of parallels between him and Conor McGregor. I know Israel Adesanya doesn't want to be...
Not a big fan of that parallel.
Not the next anyone. He's the first Israel Adesanya. But you look at the way Conor sort of after fights, he would never, put himself against one particular opponent. He'd like to explore his options. He would say, maybe Frankie, Aldo, this, that, Alvarez, maybe I'll go up in weight, down in weight, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like Israel kind of did that throughout the week. He spoke about John Jones. He threw out, or his coach threw out Stipe Miocic. He said that he was interested in that. You've got this juicy Paulo Costa carrot just dangling in front of him, but he doesn't want to sort of pigeonhole himself into anyone. And just like that, at the post-fight presser, he says, I'm not talking about John Jones. This night is kind of about me. So I like that. And like Denis said, if we're talking about the biggest stars, you look at guys like Conor, you look at guys like, Anderson Silva, guys like Chael Sonnen, even like the Ronda Rouseys. One of the things that made them so captivating was you just never knew what was next. And I think like Israel kind of has that star quality about him as well. Like you mentioned, the post-fight presser, getting his cousin on the phone, even I think an endearing moment was when he said, look, at the end of the day, I'm just a fan. I think sometimes you get guys who feel like they can't relate to Israel because he's a world-class fighter. He's so successful. He's got money, success. And, we don't have that. But when he says, this fight happened on this UFC and it was on this day and this was the number and I'm just a fan at the end of the day, I think that's something that really endears him to, all MMA fans.
It does remind me of Conor in the respect that everything he is doing feels new. Everything he's doing feels as though it makes the other guys look like they're from a past generation.
Do you think Conor could come out and do a dance routine like that? I'm putting you on the spot right now.
It would have to be Riverdance, but that's about as far as we can go.
That's the thing. Like, he didn't have to do that. He chose to do that. And he spoke a while ago, I believe at 234, when he did the rock bottoms and the stunners and the people's elbow at the open workouts. And he said to us, he's trying to bring back the pizzazz, something that, MMA kind of needs. And, doing like cartwheels and all these risky things before a world title fight, the biggest test of his career. We spoke about it on our post-fight show. Was that a bit risky? Was that a little bit crazy? And it's like you have to take these risks if you want to sort of, reach that legendary status and captivate people. I was saying, hey, if the Showtime kick missed, it would just be a dumb maneuver, but it didn't. It worked, and now it's classic. Just like I think Israel Adesanya's, crazy walkout today.
I felt as though, when Robert was coming out, he got a huge ovation, as was expected. But what I also noticed was when Izzy knocked him out, it seemed like the fans were immediately like embracing him, right? Yeah. This was amazing. I mean, surely that's been put to bed now. As you guys said in the lead up to this fight, he's one of your guys too, right?
Yeah, well, like we said, we claim New Zealanders.
You're one of our guys, Pete.
You're one of our guys. We'll claim you right here,
baby,
right now.
We did it.
It's official. It's on camera and on record. But it's like, I think at the end of the day, Australians kind of like warriors. And I think that the way Israel fought, he showed such class. There's a lot of drama in this fight as well. Knocking down Robert at the very last second of the first round. A lot of confusion, in the arena.
You couldn't hear that in the arena.
You couldn't hear. I legitimately thought that was it. Like, that's the way the ref called off the fight and realized, wow, that's the end of the round. I almost feel like Israel won himself some points there by not continuing and having that knowledge and the smarts not to go in. I think a lot of fighters, maybe would have, and I wouldn't have blamed him because you couldn't hear it. And then something that wasn't shown on the broadcast was Robert Whittaker he gave a wink to Israel Adesanya that kind of said, look, that was a good one. You got me, but I'm not going anywhere and we're just getting started. And this is a masterful performance by Israel Adesanya. It's like, you look at some of his earlier fights against guys like Brad Tavares, guys like Marvin Vettori, Rob Wilkinson, those fights went a lot longer. And you have Robert Whittaker, the baddest guy in the division, and he finished him in 2 rounds. Unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's speak about Robert for a second there. I thought, class act. That's no news for us, all right? We already knew that about the guy. But he did come out and speak to us afterwards. In hindsight, was it too long to leave between contests? I know he was injured, and to come back against a guy that was thriving, a guy that's competed as much as Israel Adesanya. In hindsight, I know it's 2020, but is that a bad thing to do when a guy's been so active, come back against him?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation because I think the strategy for this fight was a little bit wrong. Like, I know Casey picked the fight correctly, but so did I.
I didn't hear about that.
But so did I, damn it. It's still real to me, damn it, as the guy goes past in a forklift. And the thing is this, Robert came out and he believed that he could stand with Israel Adesanya. Fair call. And he had some success at the start, but we all knew that it was going to take a little bit of time for Israel to figure out the distance, figure out the movements. And because Rob's striking is so unorthodox, he was eventually going to land and take him out. Now, I believe Rob's going to make his way back to another title shot. But when he does, I would love to see what it would play out like if he actually used some of his grappling and his wrestling. You guys would have seen throughout the fight, the guys got really close. Israel got in that clinch. That would have been a perfect time to attempt a takedown. Now, I'm not saying that he'll be able to take Israel down because Israel has great takedown defense, but they were in the middle of the cage at some points with no fence behind him. I would have been fascinated to see how that would have played out, change the momentum a little bit, maybe wear Israel out. Maybe he wouldn't submit Israel or anything like that, but just stay on top of him for quite some time. He put on some muscle. So I think it was the wrong strategy. I think Rob realized after the first round that the strategy wasn't really working for them. It was just too late to switch things up. Israel already figured out the distance, already heard him, and it was sort of good night, Irene.
You know what's interesting about it, though? Like, here we talk about, was it too long a layoff? I almost feel like had Rob won, people would say, oh, his coaching stuff and he did everything right, and maybe Israel just fought too frequently, and maybe that was the downfall. He should have probably taken a break, et cetera, et cetera. I think, like, Rob Whittaker didn't really make any excuses, and I think that's kind of one of the storylines kind of leaving this event, is that the last time we had someone take a brutal loss in Ronda Rousey, they didn't handle that defeat the way Rob Whittaker did today with, utmost class, no excuses. I think that's one of the biggest stories. And I think also he kind of joins those guys like, when Dominic Cruz lost the belt, people praised him for the way he handled it. And Conor lost to Nate Diaz, people praised him. And I think you can praise Robert Whittaker for the way he handled it. And I also think Robert Whittaker's title reign, it wasn't the longest, but I also feel like you're kind of missing the story if you just look at the dates, the start and end of when he held the belt, because he was fighting a lot of the toughest guys in the division just on his way up to a title shot. So I think for his time, he was a fantastic champion. He grew the sport tremendously. He showed a lot of guys what was possible. And today was kind of like a passing of a torch in a sense. Not to say that Rob's gone, he'll be back, but it's kind of good that a guy took the torch who's from the same region as well. And now Israel can grow the sport in this area as well.
With the parallels to 193, the record-breaking attendance, the shock in the main event, even the way Whittaker kind of fought Israel, he was bulling after him, kind of like Rousey was with Home. What did that moment? Can you draw parallels between those two moments? Did it feel similar to you?
It's interesting because I remember UFC 193 and Casey and Esther and, the great MMA fighting team was here. And I remember that when Holly Holm was at media day, no one was really even lining up to interview her. Like, it was a clear-cut decision for people that Ronda Rousey was going to win that fight. And people were kind of complaining, like, why is Ronda Rousey fighting Holly Holm in Melbourne? Like, this is an easy fight for Ronda Rousey. Like, give us a better fight. Even some people were complaining about that. So in that sense, when Ronda lost and Holly won, it was like this crazy moment. People were ripping up chairs. They couldn't believe it. It was kind of history making. It changed the sport forever. In a lot of ways, the parallel is that, Israel Adesanya could be what Holly Holm was when she beat Ronda Rousey, which is obviously the biggest star in the sport. He has some really, really big plans. But at the same time, this was a fight where people knew that it was so close that anything could happen. No one counted anyone out. So there's a couple of parallels there, a couple of differences. I think at the end of the day, when Ronda Rousey lost, people went home and cried. Like Nadia Kassem, she's on the card. She was a huge Ronda Rousey fan. She was in attendance. She went home and cried that night after Ronda Rousey lost. People like hardcore Ronda Rousey fans who were really, really upset with Israel, instantly embraced by the Australians. Yeah. He's our Russell Crowe. It's official. He's now Australian. Israel, welcome to the country. It's great to have you, mate. And yeah, that's how it works down here. Petesy, you're Australian too.
Yes, thank you.
Move into my spare bedroom after this.
Will do, absolutely. Is city kickboxing, like, it's a special moment for these guys now, right? It feels like everybody's looking at these guys. And of course they had Riddell, Dan Hooker and Israel tonight. Just how special is this guy? How special is Eugene Berman?
Well, he's the guy that all of them look up to, and I think one of the things that makes Eugene special is that he doesn't really sing his own praise. He's quite reserved.
The opposite, right?
Right, like, you know, we, being the cheeky rascals that we are, wanted to nab an interview with him, you know, while Israel was doing his post-fight speech, and to no surprise, Eugene wasn't there because I think he doesn't really. I don't think it's that he doesn't like the attention. He just doesn't chase it. And unless you really kind of, you know, call him out and really ask him for that interview, he's not really going to come around. And that's why that's why you hear his fighters speak with such reverence for the guy, because he deserves so much attention and that much more. You see, you know, a lot of analysts obviously giving him a ton of props. Obviously, Luke Thomas gives him a ton of props as far as feinting and a lot of the things that he brings to the gym. And, you know, Israel describes him as kind of like almost like a father figure, kind of like a brother figure for him. So I think that let's not make a mistake. He had 3 shows this weekend, right? He had 3 guys on this card. There was a Muay Thai kickboxing event last night, right? And then before that, you had Eternal MMA. We were talking about what an insane week for a guy like Eugene Berman, but it also kind of shows, like, he's not a guy that's just going to be there for, you know, Israel and the guys on the UFC card. He's there for everybody, the whole team. He kind of treats everybody equally in a sense, and it kind of makes sense why people, you know, speak with him about such reverence about him.
And the thing with Huge, and this is what people are going to find out as they find out more about him, is this is a guy that's been working very, very hard at creating a whole bunch of things in the gym that people may not do in a gym. For example, his fighters have sort of KPIs in the sense that they look at the growth that they're going to have years down the track, and that planning is done, you know, right there and then. This is where I'm going to be in 2 years. This is where I'm going to be in 4 years. These are the skills we're going to work. I think a lot of people get lost in this whole fainting thing, and yeah, he brought fainting to.
I never heard that being celebrated until this week. I knew he was a great coach, but the whole fainting thing, I was like, what
everybody faints. Like, Rob was fainting in this fight, and it actually was a little bit effective against Israel in the first round. I mean, it's a lot more than fainting. This guy's bringing a new type of training to MMA, and it just so happens that it's in a tiny little country called New Zealand. And this gym, it used to be this tiny little gym where he would just slave away with his fighters. It's no bullshit. He's a role model. He's like a parent. He looks after more than just their fighting. He looks after their mental health, their mental welfare. He looks after, for a lot of them, like how they spend their money, how they act outside. Don't forget, when we spoke to him in an interview, he pleaded with Israel Adesanya to get rid of that interim belt. They put it in a box in the gym. I mean, this is a guy that does not spare the tiniest detail. When we interviewed Israel ahead of the Anderson Silva fight, he made a point of explaining to Israel that this guy is not as great as you think he is. You know, he's cheated with PEDs, blah, 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 blah. And he told us, you know, it's a mental thing that I did for Israel. He can't respect this guy. So this guy understands the mental game, understands the physical game, and also the techniques that people aren't utilizing.
Just quickly before we get off this fight, because I know we're going to talk about some other things, you know, I think it says a lot that they sold out this stadium. I believe it was 57,124, 27, I think. Yeah, that's the number. Mind you, we saw a lot of empty seats up at the top. It kind of didn't look like 57,000, but if they say that's the case, then okay. It says a big message about what you can do with Israel Adesanya going forward. Like, if they sold out this stadium on, you know, really kind of one card, who's to say that they won't do, you know, future fights with just Israel in this stadium, you know, and sell out another, you know, 50, even if they got 40 or so thousand, that's still massive for the UFC in this kind of region.
Just as because you've mentioned that now, I thought I'd ask you, have the Australian MMA fans done themselves any favors by selling this, like, you know, making this a record-breaking event in terms of attendance? We talked about it ahead of the fight. I mean, people were asking about it at the Q&A. Oh, why don't you just bring a better card here? Well, if you're gonna put a record-breaking crowd in the arena,
that was, by the way,
magic.
So many
I love
people.
that kid who just went off tap, and he's like, "Where's Dana? Is he even here? Where is he?" He said, you know, he's promised us all these things. I wish we had things like that. I wish Dana was here. I wish Joe Rogan was here. These are like little things that kind of don't matter, but to the hardcore fans, which is most of the people in that building are probably watching right now. These are the things that
That's what
matter.
they expect to see, right?
It's a little bit disappointing not to see Dana. Yeah, I think it'd be good. And I get your point about how if we sell out this stadium on a card like this, who's to say it's not going to happen again, right? Well, we're going to get another card with just one massive fight and the undercard's going to be lower. But I think we'll see, how a lot of these Aussies do. If Ty can bounce back, if Megan can put together a streak, if Dan Hooker can start climbing the ranks, if Volkanovski's champion, it could be completely different. You can have sometimes maybe the same fighters here, and there'd be a lot higher stakes, and the fights would, mean a lot more.
Yeah, it kind of, for me, feels like this should be changed from Marvel Stadium to Israel Adesanya Stadium, because if you look at it like this, the NRL Grand Final, I believe it's going right now, people in New South Wales tuning in, if they're able to sell out this stadium with the card that they had, and yeah, they dropped ticket prices at $35, but still, to sell out the stadium on a day like this with a card like this really sends a message to Dana White and the UFC. And why not do more stadium shows? Paulo Costa, I believe the build-up to that fight is absolutely hot. You know what I mean? So hot right now. Just like the shirt he was wearing and the Elvis glasses he was repping. And we love Paulo. So that build-up would be great. You could have a whole bunch of different fights on there. Maybe Holly Holm could make it down for once. We'll see what happens.
Just before we get on to speaking about the context of the event as a whole, was that Dan Hooker's best performance today? I certainly think it was.
Yeah, I think Dan Hooker's kind of spoken about how, people have this perception of him as this tough guy that goes into wars and has fight of the night performances. And he didn't really want that. He said that, look, Israel had that war against Kelvin Gastelum, and he was able to show everybody what he's made of, and he's had some great fights. And Dan Hooker said, I don't feel like I've had that moment. I don't feel like I've really had a chance to really show myself. I think with the Vic fight, it was a little bit too short. He wanted to show some more things off. And obviously the Barboza fight showed his toughness, but that's not really what he's there for. And I think this one was really good. He was able to make adjustments. He was able to keep Al, on the outside. So it was a great fight. And he got to sort of show his toughness, and it was an entertaining fight as well. So I think that was impressive. And also the way he got on the mic, I said it, I believe it was to you, when, Dan Hooker, he doesn't say a lot, but when he does, you listen. He speaks with conviction. And this is almost this is by far the most aggressive call out from Dan Hooker. And, Dustin Poirier shut it down. I get it. If you're chasing Conor McGregor and other fights, if you're Dustin, you just fought for the title. I understand why he wouldn't want to fight Dan Hooker, but I like that Dan said exactly what he wanted and shot his shot.
And also, I just want to say, by the way, Dustin doesn't run the company. He doesn't have president of the UFC written next to his name. And although he's chasing a fight with Conor McGregor, a lot of people are chasing a fight with Conor McGregor. So at the end of the day, he's going to do what the UFC tell him to do. This guy's not really in a position to bargain. He's not the champion, anything like that. I like the fact that Cowboy Cerrone could potentially be the next opponent for a guy like Dan Hooker. I actually think that's a bum-ass fight for New Zealand to headline an arena. I actually think Cowboy Cerrone is a guy that if you beat him, it really sends a message through the division. And both guys are such exciting fighters that I'm sure that's a fight the Kiwis and Dan would love. So there's certainly a lot of fights there that they could do, but honestly, what a performance of Dan Hooker. Super impressed. Make no mistake about it, Al did not give up. He kept trying to get back in that fight. He was putting a beating, throwing punches at Dan, and Dan just stayed in there, stayed composed, and put together a fantastic performance.
And maybe it was the Sopranos entrance music, but just worth noting, the Australians love Ally Quinta, and they kind of embraced him as if he was their own when he made his entrance, and throughout the fight.
Yeah, I mean, this event seemed a lot more fun than the last one. I was only watching back your post-fight show with Ariel from 193, and one of the things you guys mentioned a lot was right up until that main event, not a lot was going on. This time around, it was big, right? I mean, there was a lot of things going on. What performances grabbed you, apart from the main and co-main?
Well, look, Brad Riddell put on an absolute barn burner against Malaki, and it was a fight that a lot of people thought Riddell was going to win easily, but then it's like a classic night, a classic fight. Both guys are going back and forth, exactly what the Aussies love, and you're invested. You've got your Kiwi, your Aussie in there. Brad Riddell, a guy with a bright future, is now up against adversity so much earlier than people thought he would be in his UFC run, so you had that. I mean, Justin Taffer went out there and he went down, and when he went down, I mean, people went quiet. Yeah.
Scaring people there.
People went quiet. There was 57,000 apparently people that went quiet in the stadium. So that was a great performance. I mean, Megan Anderson, let's talk about her for a second. This is actually her first time fighting in Melbourne. Who would have thought it would come right now? And she wins this fight that's pivotal to her career. What's happening in her division? Who knows? But she could be a Frankie Edgar in the sense that she'll be having a title shot next. So a lot of great moments here. Jake Matthews was able to jump. It wasn't the most exciting fight from Jake, but he came out to a Triple H entrance song. He didn't do the water. He didn't do the spitting.
Far the best moment of the night. I mean, or the afternoon. Triple H, the game. If he had just spat the water out, maybe done some Triple H poses, easily the moment of the afternoon. Just quickly, Sergey, the polar bear, beating Tai Tuivasa in great fashion. I know the Aussies were kind of disappointed, and I know Tai Tuivasa, it was quite brutal watching him make that walk from the cage. You could see the disappointment on his face. Fans were yelling out. I'm not sure whether they're yelling out good things or bad things, but Tai just looked like a man who just wasn't happy with his performance and was a little bit embarrassed. So we'll see where his career sort of goes from there. But man, Sergey was like the nicest guy. Would I guess thank everybody in the crowd profusely, in the cage and post-fight as well. So I had to give him props as well. It's kind of also a weird experience for those who weren't in here. Like, this stadium is so big. I don't know if you got this, Petesy, but like, the sound travels and it takes like a long time. So
when
like
the Reaper chants were trying to get going, it was like they were on 2 different beats, right?
It's like there's a delay, right? It's like they starting in the back and then they finally come to the middle. So if you're sitting like cage side or anywhere near the middle, like you can't hear anybody in the back. And that's why those big moments feel a lot more special, because it's like the whole arena is chanting in unison and you know that you're a part of something massive because, all the sound is kind of going throughout the entire arena. Just, I will say, Rod Laver, MSG, probably the 2 best places to ever watch fights. But, to be part of historic things, Marvel Stadium is just insane.
And I was going to say, well, UFC 193, just going back to that, you had a lot of like flogs that didn't know anything about the sport, and they'd be like, oh, come on, mate. Hit him in the face, mate. And the guy would be like laying on the bottom and the other guy would be on mount. Why are you laying there, mate? You're getting punched, punch him back. And there was a lot of that. And he'd be like, man, learn about the sport. Because people had no idea really what MMA was for a lot of the casual fans here, because it was just made legalized. And we hear Ron Rousey and the Jarrett Rochelle Stephen Struve fight was terrible. But so it was much nicer not to hear those kinds of stupid comments today. People were a lot more educated.
When I hear Israel talking now, just over the last week, he seems determined to defend this belt a lot. It seems to me that he doesn't want to, like, I don't think he's just not talking about John Jones because he wants to be the A-side or whatever. I think he's doing it because he wants to be, like Khabib, a dominant champion at his own weight division. He mentioned it today in the post-fight interview. He was talking about Demetrius Johnson, Anderson Silva. I think it's fair enough to put this John Jones fight on the back burner. Like, that's going to stay around for a long time, right? It has to be Costanex, right, Kacper?
Oh, 100%. Like Denis mentioned, the shirt, the glasses, everything's hot about this rivalry. Like, even at UFC 241, Paulo Costa was shooting his shot, saying that he can beat Rob and Israel in the same night, that he wants to fly down to Melbourne. Sure enough, he is. He was cage side. I don't know how hard he was trying to actually get in the cage. It's kind of crazy because he was next to Israel's family. So on one hand, Israel's like, hey, there's my family, there's my mom and dad, I'm celebrating with them. On the other hand, it's like, hey, screw you, Paulo Costa, you and your fancy shirt. So I don't think there's really any other options. And I think with this John Jones thing, it's kind of like Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz, not in the sense that it's a rematch, but it will always be interesting, right? And like I said it at the end of the previous post show, like Israel Adesanya is a lot bigger in person when you see him. That he has a small frame, but he has a lot of dense muscle. So I'm not saying I want to see that fight next, but it's intriguing any way you cut it.
Is it fair to say that Israel Adesanya will be an overwhelming favorite if he does meet Paulo Costa next?
Absolutely. Look, this is a matchup. This is another reason why this is a great fight for him, because it will be a great build-up. But I also think this is a matchup that Israel Adesanya should win rather handily. I mean, look, Paulo Costa is a super tough guy, no doubt about it. Put on an amazing performance against a guy like Yoel Romero, but this is a guy that moves forward and takes a lot of shots, and that's something you cannot do against a guy like Israel Adesanya. We saw that today with Robert Whittaker. If you're planning on moving forward and copping shots to the face and copping kicks and copping things all over the place, Israel's not the guy to do it. So he's not exactly a Kelvin Gastelum. For example, like if Kelvin wins against Darren Till, like UFC's not pushing Kelvin Gastelum back up to the title shot anytime soon. Like they'll probably give him like a Robert Whittaker and all that kind of stuff. They're going to try and keep Israel safe. The Paulo Costa fight's the best way to do it. And it's going to be, I think, a dominant performance by Israel Adesanya that could lead to a potential John Jones fight if that guy's still around at that time.
I think also while you're endearing yourself to fans, staying active as a champion is kind of exactly what they want to see, right? And it's another way that Israel's able to separate himself from a Robert Whittaker, almost a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, where, it wasn't really Robert Whittaker's fault at all that he had to sit out, but he did, and Israel's kind of smartly playing on that and saying, look, I'm not this guy, I'm going to be fighting a lot more for you guys. And I think also says a lot about his confidence, that he doesn't feel like he needs like X amount of months to really develop his game. He feels like he's ready to face the top guys, right here and now.
Well, I think that's everything that I have for you, lads. Another historic night in Melbourne. There has been construction workers going past us throughout this. We've been rained on, but you've stayed here and you've stayed strong with me. I really appreciate it.
It's a huge honor for us to be here because, you know, almost 4 years ago, we did the MMA fighting pre-show and post-show. Obviously, Ari was here at the time, and now we're doing it the same thing. You guys have been kind enough to have us on, you know, 2 days in a row to put up with us, and now we're doing it with the new generation. So we really appreciate it.
Thanks very much,
The
lads.
Three Musketeers of Melbourne, Australia.
Absolutely.
Wrapping up.
What a beautiful moment. What a beautiful moment. We love yous loads. We'll see yous very soon. Mwah. Blow them a kiss. Blow them a kiss. Blow them a kiss.